Each week, American History TV's American Artifacts visits museums and historic places. And up next, we take you inside the U.S. Capitol's House Wing, where historian Matthew Wisniewski and curator Farah Elliott use artifacts and photographs to trace the history of women in Congress. This is the first of a two-part program.
The story of women in Congress begins with Jeannette Rankin, who is elected to the House in 1916 from Montana. She's elected to the House 4 years before women had the right to vote nationally. And in a way, she's really a bridge from the suffrage movement to women attaining full political rights. If you look at the first 2 decades of women who were elected, and there's roughly about 20 women who were elected to Congress from Rankin into the mid-1930s, a good number of these people don't have a political background. They haven't held elective office. And instead, they are, a large number of them, are widows who succeed their late husbands in Congress. And later, political scientists would describe this as the widow's mandate, which was the route for a lot of the early women into Congress. And this really persisted up through the 1960s and even into the 1970s. A large number of women followed their husbands, or maybe they had a prominent political father who they followed into Congress. So there was a real kind of familial connection, and that wasn't Rankin's experience. It was for this woman here who we're looking at in this picture on the rostrum, this wonderful picture of Edith Norris Rogers. Now, Rogers was a widow she's from Massachusetts, represented a district from northern Massachusetts, and she succeeded her husband, John Rogers, who was a high-ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the ranking Republican. And she actually had a lot of experience helping him with administering the committee and administering his personal office. And so she knew what his legislative agenda was. She kind of knew the rhythms and the contours of life here on Capitol Hill. And one of the things that happens when a senior member passes away like that, the House has to have a special election. No one can be appointed to the House. And depending on state laws, that election has to happen in a fairly short amount of time. So what would happen is local party leaders would often turn to the widow and say, will you run for the partial term because you have name recognition? Rogers is going to be on the ballot. And the expectation was that the wife would serve out this term and then she would retire and the party leaders would find a suitable male candidate to succeed her. Well, Rogers had different ideas. She actually ends up staying in the House for 35 years. She is still the longest serving woman in the House. And she was for a very long time the longest serving woman in Congress. She was recently surpassed by Barbara Mikulski of Maryland, who has both House service and Senate service. But she not only had longevity, she was very influential in terms of Veterans Affairs. Prior to her experience in the House, she also had volunteered for the Red Cross. She'd become an advocate for servicemen returning from World War I. And when Republicans in the 1940s briefly regained the majority in the 80th Congress, she becomes one of the very first women to chair a major congressional committee. She chairs the Veterans Affairs Committee in the 80th Congress and then again in the 83rd Congress when control flip-flopped back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. She's a Republican.
You can view this and all other American Artifacts programs at our website, cspan.org/history.